I put on my hat of Ideagen as acting chair for Europe, and I give a warm welcome to the Greek and non-Greek members of our international panel on the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN. Ideagen is a non-political, non-governmental organization created by a prominent Greek American, George Sifakis, the main aim of which is to preserve the attention of the world on the SDGs and preserve and increase the awareness of their relevance. The main aim of ALLILON, as you know by now, is to better prepare, particularly the youth of Greece, for the world that is coming. Thus, our cooperation, between ALLILON and Ideagen came about very naturally. Ideagen has a network of radio, TV, specialized communication platforms, and the magazine, and reached more than 100 million people in 2022. Ideagen will distribute the video of this panel or extracts of it through its network. We live in a world, as we can all see, which is increasingly fragmented. The way big power competition develops seems to indicate that not much of our real multilateralism will remain in the foreseeable future. I'm talking about the real multilateralism, not the plurilateral or the regional or otherwise fragmented multilateralism, which is not a real multilateralism. These evolutions illustrate how the SDGs run the risk of becoming much less relevant. And this is not what we, Ideagen and ALLILON, and I'm sure you in the audience, it's not what we want. We believe that the SDGs need to remain strong and relevant, and they might well appear down the road as the best hope of humanity to recover sometime in the future. I don't know when, the real multilateralism I mentioned before. This is a target surely worth fighting for. Looking forward, we consider obvious that if real multilateralism, the one, as I said, uniting all humanity, is to survive, recover, and come back reasonably strongly, and even reinforced sometime in the future, there are two things that are required at least. First, SDGs need to remain a strong option in the minds of people and in the minds of policymakers during the current crossing of the desert in terms of fragmentation of the global order. Second, equally important, if not more, the European Union needs to preserve its strong support for the SDGs as a well-established global champion of SDGs and thus real multilateralism. The world needs a strong EU also from that point of view. For that reason, Ideagen and ALLILON, we are delighted and grateful for our cooperation with the university. And I would add that the efforts of the university that were mentioned before to advance the implementation of the SDGs, and which will be explained also during the panel, this effort is certainly worth a lot of attention from any supporter of the SDGs globally. This first panel is really a dream team on the implementation of the SDGs and the role of the EU, and I really look forward to it. I'm now delighted to pass the floor on to the coordinator of our next panel, Professor Papageorgiou. Mr. Papageorgiou, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and welcome. Thank you firstly for asking me to chair this part of the meeting. and welcome to everyone. Welcome to friends from Brussels, Thessaloniki, and all over the world. I've been asked to chair this first panel on EU and Sustainable Development Goals, state of play of implementation and prospects for 2030. I won't say a lot, it's just that for the EU, last year, Commissioner Gentiloni said that the SDGs remain a compass for the European Union. In between, lots of things happened, and this compass has lost a little bit its compass, as it seems, but I'm sure that our panel will analyze and assess both developments and delays in EU's commitment to Sustainable Development Goals. I will pass the floor firstly to Ambassador Ioannis Vrailas, who is a permanent representative of Greece to the European Union, and who will give an introduction on the EU perspectives of the SDGs, overall implementation, progress and shortcomings on the basis of the European Parliament Resolution 2022-2002. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and a warm welcome to all my fellow co-panelists. A special mention to my good friend, my Danish counterpart, Ambassador Anderson, who, as of this coming, August, September, will be the ambassador of Denmark to Greece. So he will be based in Athens, and therefore there will be plenty of opportunities for the University of Thessaloniki to work with him also in the future. Let me give you my perspective on the SDGs based on my past experience. I was deputy head of the EU delegation in New York, and therefore worked really hard when the SDGs were being negotiated. There were two aspects: one, coordination of the EU position, and then, of course, the negotiations with the other members of the UN. And of course, I can see from where I stand the state of play here in Brussels and in the European Union. The SDGs were a unique accomplishment, taking into account their scale, vision, and universal imprint. It was one of the most significant global policy agendas ever set out, a blueprint for the development of humanity and the planet in the 21st century. The 2030 agenda reflected a global consensus on an overarching, transformative, and comprehensive framework for development. It also implied an extremely high level of ambition and an enormous undertaking at the national and international levels. And sadly, in light of the recent developments, one must say it was possibly the last time that the whole world has come together as one on a project of such magnitude. As I said, I had the honor of participating directly in this long, extremely challenging, but ultimately fruitful and rewarding process. In my view, several factors contributed to its success. The emphasis was always on the universal character of the agenda, leaving no one behind. In the same spirit, all efforts were made, including by the European Union, to emphasize that the problems and challenges concerned all states, without distinctions based on the level of development. And as such, those problems needed to be addressed by all without exception, meaning by the developed countries as well. The process was open, it was transparent and inclusive, and this translated into partnerships and alliances across the traditional UN dividing lines. And this was beneficially complemented by an unprecedented engagement and involvement of all stakeholders, states, but also civil society, business, academics, and citizens. But as soon as the ink of the signature on the historic agreement had dried, the question that caused angst to us all was, could the journey leading to full implementation be made possible? The keys for that would always have been: A, how seriously would government, civil society, and business take their roles together and in partnership in implementing the SDGs? More specifically, would governments and international organizations reorganize themselves around these goals? And C, as the SDGs were framed as a "we the people" document, have the people around the world been inspired to participate actively in the implementation of the goals? Now, not even counting the increasingly tumultuous period of history we are experiencing, some problems were already evident from day -1, even when the negotiations had not yet been concluded. First, there was the problem of internal coordination. A main issue was who would be calling the shots, since the SDGs were horizontal by nature. To give you an example, in the EU, we could see that having the various institutions and departments around the rond-point Schuman agree on a single position would be very difficult. You had the European External Action Service involved, you had various DGs of the European Commission involved, DEFCO, Klima, ENVI, and having the member states come together required that we held regularly what they called a jumbo meeting of 27 multiplied by 3. So you had 3 working groups meeting all together and trying to reach a conclusion. Imagine what it means, 100 people, around 100 people to agree on an EU line to take. And of course, the same coordination difficulties were encountered by individual member states. 2, the SDGs implied a change in the mindset, which I have not always witnessed. At the UN, for instance, one got the impression that rather than ensuring across-the-board coordination, the various departments and agencies were keen to continue to go solo, focusing only on how they would get additional funds under the pretext that pursuing the SDGs was added to their already existing tasks, as if the 2030 agenda did not provide a blueprint for working differently. And the same was true of national administration. And 3, communicating the goals around the world to the average citizen. I don't know if you also conducted, as I did, individual polls. I was asking friends, I was asking taxi drivers, I was asking various people if they had ever heard of the SDGs. And I have to say that the results were not very encouraging. And I'm worried that in spite of some laudable efforts on all those 3 fronts, coordination, different mindset, communication, the pessimistic omens have subsequently materialized. I will present you with a few cases in point. In the European Union, we are now much more driven by the Fit for 55, the green and digital transformation, the recovery and resilience plans, rather than on the implementation of the 17 goals and the 169 targets, which are very rarely talked about. When we were preparing the EU African Union Summit, which was held in February 2021, I was the only one in Coreper, and I think that was due to my sinful past, as I said, EU Deputy Perm Rep in New York, to suggest that the mention of the 2030 agenda be included in the final joint declaration. The counter-argument that we heard, in particular from the cabinet of the President of the European Council, was that we did not want to antagonize the African nations who were keen to highlight their own 2063 agenda. This is a master plan to transform Africa into the powerhouse of the future, with goals to be reached by, indeed, 2063. Now, if the European Union does not stand up firmly by the SDGs, and there is no buy-in by the Global South, what chances are there that we achieve success by 2030? And finally, more recently, the UN Secretary General met with the members of the European Council last week. His message was also bleak, as he described the current state of play as disappointing. Progress towards the achievement of the goals was already slow, but in his view, as a result of the pandemic, it is now backsliding. The divide between the West and developing countries is widening. The Western countries have profited from the large subsidies and recovery funds, which were simply unavailable in the global South. And the rise in food and energy prices has also fueled debt and poverty. So this is where we stand. I hope that I do not sound like a party pooper when I say that all the above does not bode well, as we have now crossed the midpoint on the road to 2030. On the contrary, I'm actually grateful to ALLILON, the University of Thessaloniki, to Ideagen for keeping the SDGs high up on the agenda. We need to continue and do everything we can to succeed, because to fail would be catastrophic in terms of the long-term stability of humanity. We know that it is through empowering the people, through realizing their rights and giving them an equal opportunity to thrive, that we can ensure that we all live in peaceful societies. But we are definitely not out of the woods, and we need to do much more and work much harder in order to promote the 2030 agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. It was a rather bleak approach, I'm afraid, but you correctly said that failure is not an option. It is a possibility, nevertheless, and we have to make sure that such a possibility is as distant and remote as possible. I'll now pass the floor to Mrs. Christina Kokkinakis. She is Deputy Managing Director and Director for Values and Multilateral Relations at the European External Action Service.
Thank you very much, and καλό απόγευμα σε όλους και σε όλες. Thank you very much for having invited me to speak on the EU and the SDGs implementation and on the current state of play, and also thanks for giving me the opportunity to dwell a bit on the prospects for 2030. And let me start as well by expressing my deepest condolences to Greece and especially to the university related to the tragic accident some weeks ago. I will start by maybe just explaining what I'm doing currently. Currently, I'm responsible both for the United Nations within the External Action Service, but also for human rights, democracy, and the rule of law, as well as for multilateralism in general. The SDGs, of course, form a big part of my daily portfolio, and bode well with this well-established EU-UN relationship we have. The EU is one of the really preferred and privileged partners when it comes to the UN. We work extremely well together, and for us, when we talk about an effective and efficient multilateralism, we always think on the UN at its center. So I think this is really the first point: well-established relationship, which is good, but like every relationship, it needs work to be kept alive and to be kept as good as it is. And as Ambassador Vrailas just said, we are just coming out literally of a meeting with the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who was here last week and debriefed the EU leaders on exactly this point: EU-UN relations and where we stand basically when it comes to the SDGs. The EU is supporting the UN through its three different pillars. And just to remind you of these three ones, the first one is peace and security, the second one is development, and the third one is human rights. This is our strong commitment. And as you know, we are the biggest, together with our member states, the biggest financial contributor to the United Nations. So just to give you one number, in 2020, the EU provided 3.5 billion euros on voluntary contributions to the United Nations. So this is a huge sum we have in front of us. It's a huge sum we are contributing, we are paying. Now, the obvious question is, how does this, what do we do with that, and how do we make sure that the SDGs, as was already said, one of our really major and multilateral commitments will be upheld. The SDGs, just to frame a bit the process, Ambassador Vrailas started with the beginning of the SDGs. To add a bit, currently we are witnessing a second process in the United Nations, which started last year, launched by the Secretary General, and which is called Our Common Agenda. In short, it's another UN abbreviation. It is called the OCA. And this is a process that that basically was launched nearly 2 years ago, with the aim of helping the world, helping the universal world, let's say the universal commitment to face the challenges of the future. Our common agenda has currently 10 work strands. The first one is, just to give you an example, is the common agenda for peace. The second one we are currently working on is the Global Digital Compact. So definitely one of the challenges of the future, anything that has to do with digital and new and emerging technologies. And there will be 8 more work strands. This process is heavily related to the SDGs process, as it will lead to the summit, the SDG summit that is scheduled for 18th of September. So this is really the next step now. And it will furthermore next year lead to the Summit for the Future, where the intention is to rethink and redefine the global multilateral system. Maybe a couple of more points on where we stand currently. Multilateralism is in a crisis. This is nothing new. The new thing is that we have a war on the European continent, and we are facing, as European Union within the UN, a huge challenge when it comes to the perception of our work. The perception of our work, and this work is heavily related to the SDGs, the work of the European Union has to do first and foremost with development cooperation, and with that trying to uphold peace, human rights and democracy, is unfortunately not perceived as such. So we are facing strong winds, I would say, coming from the south, putting us a bit into a corner, stating that we are not doing enough to implement the SDGs, and that we are solely interested in the war in Ukraine. So this is the current landscape in which we are moving. Maybe a point on 2023. 2023 is the year of sure multilateralism and universality, given that we are commemorating 75 years of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights this year. And we're also commemorating 30 years of a declaration that reconfirmed universality. So this is a bit the global setting. Now, how do we react as European Union? 3 points I would like to share with you. First, I mentioned already the UN Secretary General addressing the European Council. This is not such an old tradition, surprisingly enough. This has happened for the second or the third time only. And this is one of the deliverables of the EU-UN dialogue, which was established last year. So just to flag that. Our 3 points, how we try to work around these challenges. One is, for the first time, the European Union will undergo its voluntary review. This is how it is called, EU-VR. This is a review for the first time ever of a supranational organization, and it will be a review of our contribution towards the implementation of the Agenda 2030. This is an event that will take place in July in New York. First time, and this is at the same time a challenge, but I think first and foremost an opportunity for us to demonstrate that this misperception we are unfortunately facing is not correct. For us, it will be a possibility to demonstrate that the ambitions set out in the work program by the European Commission bode extremely well with the SDGs. Think of climate change, think of the Green Deal, think of everything that has to do with promoting peace and security. And last but not least, of course, based everything that has to do with the rule of law and with the importance to respect the principles and the purposes of the UN Charter. We will try, as I said, to use this wisely, this review. We are currently in the process, and this is why this conference is extremely timely, in the process of identifying our main points, which will be around green, climate neutral, digital, as I said, but also when it comes to involving all the stakeholders that have been involved in the in the creation of the SDGs, such as civil society, but also youth. So this is one point, and I'm happy then also to answer some questions, should there be some on that. A second point I'd like to mention is the European project called the Global Gateway. Now, this is an initiative that would still need to be promoted a bit more. It was launched in December 2021. And with this Global Gateway, we are offering really to the world a contribution to revitalize and to implement this global partnership, which is SDG 17. We will help with that to promote public and private investments in sustainable connectivity. It's about infrastructure. It's about infrastructure on energy, on digitalization, but also on transport. We've been rolling out the Global Gateway together with the member states. So this is the so-called Team Europe approach. And we aim collectively to mobilize 300 billion euros by 2027. And since Africa was already mentioned a couple of times this afternoon, with half of the investment across Africa. So this is the European Union's, I would say, response to explain what we are doing and to affront, let's say, one of the big challenges of the next year, namely, on the one hand, improving digitalization worldwide, but on the other hand, also helping by that implementing the SDGs. Now, a last point on the SDG summit, I already mentioned it. So this is basically le prochain rendezvous on 18th of September. It will take place in New York. It has a couple of main points. Trying to see where we stand on the leaving no one behind. So on this inclusive, multilateral, universal approach, including for future generations. We will also look at the SDG acceleration as such. We will look at financial inclusion, at closing the digital divide. We will look at how to reduce basically poverty, how to increase development and human rights. So this is the next step. There will be a political declaration coming out. So just that you have heard that from this summit, SDG summit in September, which is how heads of states and government see the direction for the next 4 years when it comes to the SDGs implementation. So this is an important declaration. It is also de facto sort of midpoint check of the 2030 agenda. So it's crucial. And it will be also an important case in point for the EU to show where we stand. I mentioned shortly also our common agenda. The common agenda will then lead to the summit for the future in 2024. I mentioned a couple of work strands. There will be more. There will be work strands on youth. There will be work strands on emergency platforms. There will be work strands on peace and security. So this is a process we are of course also currently engaging. And the last point from my side, looking at the international financial instruments. We heard what Antonio Guterres told us at the European Council. So he was pleading basically for the EU to concentrate on the implementation of the SDGs. He was also pleading for us to have a universal view when it comes to the different crises, but also for the international financial instruments to see how we can, institutions, how we can work and how we can further develop them, including multilateral development banks. Voila. So with all that, I'm happy to answer some questions. This is a first overview on where we stand, but we will definitely need the help of the member states to make all that happen. Thank you very much.